Everybody, thank you for joining us for this time. I'm really excited about today. We're talking about suicide, a very important issue in our day. Tragically, it's a thing that we see over and over again, and we're talking about that, wanting to help you with this issue, whether you're dealing with it or someone you love is dealing with it. And I really believe this time today is going to be a blessing for you. Our guest today is Donna Gibbs. Donna is the founder and director of Summit Wellness Centers here in Henderson County, and they have several locations, but I know Donna has been here in our community for 22 years. She's been in ministry here, counseling, and she's just made a tremendous impact on our community. And when we thought of who we could talk to on this issue, I kept hearing her name over and over again from different people. So Donna's agreed to meet with us today, and I'm just so thankful. Donna, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here. Tough topic, but an honor to be here.
Thank you also for all that you do for our community. You serve our community so well. I've personally known so many people who've come to you for counseling and come through your counseling center, and I always hear so many good things. So we appreciate that a lot.
Well, thank you.
We really do.
Thank you.
So just want to ask a few questions, Donna, today, and just get your perspective and bring your expertise to bear on this difficult topic. What are you seeing in your world, in the counseling world right now with suicide and people struggle with it here in our community?
That is such an important question because I think sometimes we can be naive and think that we are immune. We're in this beautiful area, Western North Carolina, and we think that suicide affects other communities, and it is affecting ours, and it has for some time. Our rates of suicide are actually higher than some of the rates in counties further east in our state. And actually, there was an assessment, a health assessment done for Henderson County, right here in our county, just a couple of years ago. I think it was 2017 or 2018. And one of the things that came out of that was also just the evidence that our teenagers here are hurting. Of the ninth graders that were asked, over 21% of them reported that they had had serious thoughts of suicide in the last year. And we know that we have this vulnerability here. We also know, just in terms of mental health, mental wellness, 25% of those who will come into this room are going to struggle with a mental health disorder at some point in their lifetime. None of us are immune from that, and just so grateful to be having the conversation, because I think that's one of the things that we can do to be helping, is just having the conversations that, yes, this is present, this is not something new, and even some of the struggles we're having since COVID-19, we were having some of this before.
Wow, so this has just made the problem even worse than it was. I don't even like to think about that. I think we live, like you said, in this nice, beautiful, small mountain community. But I hear you saying we're dealing with this problem in a huge way, bigger than communities around us.
We are.
That's so heartbreaking. Is the quarantine that we're in right now causing a greater need in this area? Are you seeing an uptick in the need of not only suicide but mental health?
Right. And that's a complex question.
Yeah.
Because the answers are both yes and no. What I am observing is that COVID-19 affects us, but it affects us differently. We've heard the phrase, we're all in this storm together, but we're in a different boat. Well, yes, we are in different boats. And so for some people, I'm seeing people who've had a history of mental illness, and they've wrestled and they've had to use their tools. But if they're in a situation right now in which their finances are stable and they're not exposed to the virus directly, their family members are safe, then they are actually settling down some. Their symptoms are calming some. Their anxiety is lowering. The stressors are lessening. They're reevaluating life right now. And for them, they're actually thriving in this. But we have others who are in a pressure cooker, who maybe had a history of mental health struggles or maybe didn't. But they are facing, the furlough or rumors of it, and they're concerned about their finances. They may be a small business owner, don't have access to those loans yet through the SBA or those PPP loans, and they're feeling like everything's closing in, and they're feeling trapped. The isolation is certainly taking a toll on some people. And then the virus itself. Those who are contracting the virus are reporting higher rates of depression, not only because they're isolated, but just physically, God made us whole, and where we're struggling physically, we're going to feel it emotionally. And then there are those who've experienced loss. You know, we've discussed if someone has a death in their family or death of a loved one, they're not able to grieve in the way that we normally would, and so they're very lonely in that. If they're in the hospital, they're very lonely in that. And so for those people, I'm seeing that suicidal ideation is actually on the rise for all the list of people. So the thoughts of suicide, they're encountering those thoughts more often than previous. I will say good news. There is some good news in this. That I was just speaking with Frank Stout with our Henderson County Sheriff's Department yesterday and just inquiring from him, what are you seeing? I know what I see on my end, but sometimes it looks different on their end. And the good news is that they have not had suicides that they've seen since COVID-19. But then the reality is the first of this year, there was a 2-week period in which they saw nearly 10 suicides within a 2-week period. And so that's why I say this is something that is not just present because of COVID-19. I think it's stirring up some symptoms for a lot of people, but we've been in a mental health crisis for some time.
Wow. I've seen it. I serve with the Sheriff's Department as a chaplain, and that's one of the things we get called to quite often when we go with them. It's a suicide, and just, I've said this before to people, there's just nothing like that tragedy that I've ever experienced, to be on the scene of something like that and to see what the family experiences. There's just something so heartbreaking and traumatic about that is just unexplainable unless you've been through it or been on that scene. But it is a real issue. I can testify to that right here in our community.
Yeah.
Where do you see this going over the next months? I know right now when we're recording this, we're still a couple weeks out from even looking at phase 1. Where do you see this going in a few months? Should we continue in quarantine?
I have concern about that continuing just because of the pressure cooker. And my encouragement for those who are in those vulnerable places financially or they're isolated, I'm going to just urge you, hold on. And hopefully this will move along and we can get back to some form of a new normal soon. And I think one of the things to keep in mind, anytime we're wrestling with mental health concerns, we have some destructive thoughts. And one of our thoughts oftentimes when we're having suicidal thoughts is that the life that I'm living today is never going to get better. This is as good as it gets. And this is not as good as it gets. Things will get better.
Yes.
It's just sometimes we get tunnel vision and it's hard to see beyond where we are.
Is it normal? That word normal is hard to really discuss. It's a really broad word. But is it normal for your average person at some time in their life to think, at the very least, I may be better off dead than alive?
I think we are all vulnerable to a destructive thought. All of us, whether it's a suicidal thought or any other kind of thought, all of us are. And so, yes, I would say it's normal for us to, in a situation like this, to feel anxious or to have an anxious thought or to have a sad thought about it. We may even have a fleeting thought about self-harm or a fleeting thought that others would even be better off without us. I would say it is not normal to get stuck on meditating on a suicidal thought. And that's how we begin to differentiate, okay, we need to do something, we need to intervene.
Yeah. There's a famous quote, and I believe it's attributed to Martin Luther about thoughts. And he said, I can't stop the birds from flying over my head, but I can stop them from building a nest in my hair.
That's it.
And I guess when this thing becomes really serious is when the nest is beginning to be built, so to speak.
Yes, when we find ourselves not just with a fleeting thought that passes as fast as it came, but then I'm sitting and I'm imagining what that would be like, or I'm imagining how I would harm myself. That meditation is dangerous. It is toxic. Our thoughts can either be medicinal or toxic. It's kind of like food. They're going to either be helpful for us and helpful for our brain, or they're going to be destructive. We could speak for hours about the place of the brain in this, but the truth is every thought that we have has a chemical release. And so we really can't afford to meditate on a destructive thought because it creates a form of brain injury.
Wow. I'd not considered that.
And whatever you fertilize grows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if a person out there listening to us has had a fleeting thought of this, it's not time to panic. Is that what I'm hearing? But if this becomes a meditation, or if it gets into the planning stages, they need to take some action on this.
And I would say to that person, if there's been a fleeting thought, I'm going to encourage you to treat it like cancer. Be very, very aggressive with it. Scriptures make reference to taking those thoughts captive. One of the most dangerous things that we can do is be passive with a destructive thought like that. And so while we don't want to be panicky, we are going to be aggressive with a destructive thought.
Yes, absolutely. How could I tell Donna that, what are some signs that somebody I love may be thinking about this? I know so many times with suicides, people are completely taken by surprise. They may have had an idea they struggle with something, and other times it's just like out of the blue, this tragedy occurs. Are there signs that we can, reliable signs that we can say somebody I love may have a problem?
And first I would reiterate, if you're listening and you have lost a loved one and you were blindsided, you didn't see it coming, just to validate that there are some times in which it was their intent that you not see it coming. And so no shaming.
Yes.
However, we can be mindful of some symptoms, perhaps, that we might sometimes see. And so if you have a loved one who has verbalized that they are feeling hopeless, that they think they'd be better off not being here, that they are eager for heaven, and that they feel that they are burdened to those around them, particularly if you hear a loved one who just flat out says they're thinking about killing themselves, and this is how. Those are the most obvious ways in which we would be concerned. But we also want to be watchful for a loved one who is isolating even more than they have to right now. A loved one who has increased a substance use. I know most of the suicides that I've encountered have involved alcohol. Alcohol sales are up right now. That's of great concern to me. So any kind of self-medicating, if they're giving things away, these are things to just be watchful for.
I love what you said, because I've seen it many times in the aftermath of a suicide that the family feels responsible. They feel like, I should have seen that. I should have known that. And I think it's important for them to understand that we're not God. We're not omniscient. We don't know everything.
Right.
But it's good to know that maybe there are some signs that we can see and point that person to some help. So if I have a loved one that I think I'm starting to see these signs, what's a good step for me to take with them?
I think just having that honest dialogue is the place to start. And hopefully they can be open to that honest dialogue and just asking them, is this where you are? Tell me how you're struggling. Tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me what your plans are. Having that honest dialogue. Sometimes we can be so afraid of that, and it is very uncomfortable. It may be more comfortable for you and I because we are more likely to have some of those conversations, but for the average person, that is terrifying to have that conversation. So I understand that, but I think starting with that conversation and then formulating a plan to get them some help, ensuring that they are supervised, that you have someone watching over, that you've removed anything that they could use to harm themselves, and then get a safety plan in place that could look like a professional counselor being brought in, or maybe even a hospitalization. And certainly if they already have a plan in place, then you have elevated the need for that level of care.
So you're saying if you hear about a plan, they've gone down the road enough to where there's some intervention necessary. What I've heard before, when is it time for me to call law enforcement? When does that come? Because that's certainly an option. That's a tough conversation.
It is.
When is it time to do something like that?
But when you know that all those symptoms are there and your loved one is resistant to your care and concern, and you are sincerely concerned about their well-being, but you don't have the ability to intervene. And so then you call, but at minimum you can call for a safety check, a wellness check for a loved one. That feels a little less intimidating sometimes than going to the magistrate's office to do an involuntary commitment. But taking steps that may be necessary.
So I don't have to go straight for having them committed. That's good for our audience to know, because that's what they think. I call the law enforcement. I'm going to go. They're going to be in the hospital, and that's necessary for some people. But I could just call and have a safety check done. Yeah.
And the next step may be necessary.
Right.
But oftentimes I've found that with a conversation, sometimes somebody can find hope through just a conversation. They can rely on the hope of another person and say, okay, they can find a way to be reasonable and say, okay, I need some help, I agree, and I'm going to go along with that, but I need you to go with me. And so it may be then that you join them, you take them to a local emergency department.
But if they're not, you can take steps. Now, the person's likely to be angry with that too.
They may be. But remembering in that moment, it may not be that you're there to be their friend, but you're there to help save their life. And that's when, we've got all of these symptoms in place. It may be that someone is just struggling with deep, deep depression. Remember, suicidal ideation is just a symptom of depression. And it could be that depression has just escalated and they need some help, but they are not emergent. That they can say, yes, I promise I'm not going to act on that, and you're able to provide that supervision, or they make that contract with you. And so then at that point, perhaps just setting an appointment with a professional counselor is the most appropriate step. Reaching out, if it's a member here at your church, it would be most reasonable for them to reach out to you and say, hey, I heard that conversation. That's where I am. I'm committing that I'm not going to do anything, but I need help. So let's walk through this together.
So if you can get them in some sort of a process that they are getting healing, yeah, powerful.
Because when you're at that place, you're hopeless, you can't see a process.
Right.
There is one there. You cannot see a way out at that point.
I think we all have, when we've heard of someone we know taking their own life, to think, what could have led them to this? It's almost the tears I've cried over people who've done this have been more for where they got to mentally and emotionally, and the torture they must have been in to get to this place. What's going on in that mind? What do you see? What's happening in that person's mind when they make this decision?
As we talked about those destructive thoughts, and it starts with that feeling hopeless, that I'm in a circumstance I can't get out of. I can't see a way out of it. And it's where we call ruminating. I'm stuck like a hamster on a wheel on that destructive thought, and it monopolizes the thoughts until I'm at a place where all I can see is what is in front of me in this trial in my life, this struggle in my life. Can't see beyond it, can't see hope. And it begins to seem like the most rational thing to do, where it's not. Oftentimes from the outside looking in, we say that's such a selfish act. Well, we say that because we see the aftermath of so many people who are hurting so desperately when they've lost a loved one. But I don't think that in general, someone who is contemplating suicide is trying to be selfish. They're just trying to get the pain to stop.
And they just can't see any other way.
Right.
The pain has become so bad that they just feel like they buy into a lie that the only way out of this is just to end this. Yeah.
And you said a powerful word. They buy into a lie.
Yes.
And as we say, as believers, we are not immune to this. We are not immune to believe in a lie. And as a believer, we've got an enemy who is a liar and an accuser. This is his battleground, and he's going to fuel that. And isolation just makes it even harder. So you're not bouncing those thoughts off of someone else to be able to see truth in them, or bouncing it off of Scripture to see, oh, but God does have plans for me. My plans are not ruined. My life is not over.
So there is hope for these folks who are listening to us now, there's hope beyond what you can see in front of you right now. You just need somebody else's help to see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it would be impossible to even count the number of people I've sat across who have been at that acute suicidal place and now are living wonderful lives. They are your neighbors. They're the people who sit on the pews, who are sitting in the chairs by you. They're your family members, and they are evidence that there is life beyond that point of hopelessness.
That is just so powerful. It really is. So if someone is listening to us, and I'm sure there are a number of people are going to be listening to this, someone's watching today, and you could speak to them. They're contemplating suicide. They're headed down that road. What would you say to them right now?
Yeah.
We've already given them some good things, but what would you say, kind of summation to
Right.
them?
I would say to that person, if this is you and you are listening and you realize that what we are talking about is speaking to your heart and you resonate with this, this is the most relevant topic in your life right now, I'm going to beg you to postpone that decision. Right now, I'm just begging you to postpone the decision. And the only thing that I'm asking you to do is to start a conversation. And I know that feels terrifying, that feels overwhelming, particularly if you already have a plan in place. But I'm going to encourage you to start the conversation. And so right now, and when I say right now, I mean right now. Right now, while you're hearing these words, right now, pull out your phone, start texting that person that you know can handle the conversation, or putting the phone number in for your pastor, or calling the National Suicide Hotline. Their lines are up. You're not alone in this. There are a lot of people who are right where you are right now. You are not alone, even though you feel like you very much are. And I'm going to just ask you to postpone that decision until you can have a conversation with someone who can handle this with you and who can facilitate you through this. You don't have to make the decisions after this. They can help walk you through. And that's what I would encourage. Let's pause for just a moment. I would also encourage you to really contemplate as you're pausing. If I did in my life, what type of trauma would it invite into the lives of people that I do love? And while I recognize if you're at a dark place, you're thinking they'd be better off without me. And I'm going to assure you, because I have walked through the aftermath of this with so many children, adolescents, spouses, mamas and daddies, their life will never be the same. And so I'm just to invite you to contemplate, if I really did that, what trauma would be invited into the lives of people that I really don't want to hurt? And just putting a pause on this.
I wish, I can't count how many of these scenes of tragedy that I have been on with our law enforcement. And if you guys are watching, all of you men and women in law enforcement, you're just heroic to us.
Yes.
And every time I see you out there and go with you, I just thank God, because I'm on call 3 months out of the year maybe. They do this day in and day out. And if you're thinking about this, if you could just be on one of those scenes and see the heartbreak, and that's not even a good word. I don't think we have a good word for what it feels like in the aftermath. I've been there many times right after that happened, maybe an hour later, and just see families and children and the brokenness that's there. I think that's so valuable to help them see past their current struggle and realize what that would cause.
And that's not the shame.
Not at all.
It's just, hey, this is a reality check. This
Yes.
is the rest of the story. There's more to this than just ending the pain that you're in right now.
Yes.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah. It is bigger than that, what they see right now.
Right.
Oh, I think that'll help somebody. I really believe that with all my heart. Oh, this is just so helpful. I love that they can call a suicide hotline as well if they're embarrassed or afraid to talk to somebody they know, even in their community. They can
Right.
call that number. We'll have that number on the screen that you can get that and call that. And like you said, do it now. Don't
now,
wait.
now is the key. And I even think of this conversation is an appointed time for
Absolutely.
someone who is watching. And so this is just the first step of God making provision of that way out of a hopeless situation. And so let's not postpone that. Let's respond right away.
Yeah, we really believe that God's going to have people watching this at different times in different places that didn't even intend to, but somehow they came here to
Yeah,
this.
somehow.
And God just, we know how.
Yeah.
In their mind, they may have just stumbled upon us, but somebody was looking out for them, and we know who that is.
Yes,
That was
if you
guiding them to
stumbled, it
this.
is because God is rescuing. Absolutely.
Say that again.
If you stumbled on this,
Yes.
it is because God is rescuing, because He is our rescuer.
How can we help, Donna, as church people? I've tried to talk about this with each of these subjects in mental health because I think many times the church has failed to address this properly. Are there any corrections you would bring to the church and to Christians in general? I know you're a very humble person and we're not trying to police everybody's life, but what have you seen that the church has done sometimes that hasn't been helpful in this and other mental health struggles?
Well, I'll start by saying some of the things I think the church has been doing really well.
That's good.
And even now in the midst of COVID-19 crisis, the church is thinking totally outside of the box, is finding ways to keep people connected and living in community because we understand how important that is, that God designed us to be among a body of believers and to not live in isolation. And I think the church is rising to the occasion with that. And in doing so is saving lives, I think. I also see, there is more discussion among the church about mental health issues. So a little more awareness of that, and so grateful for that. In terms of areas where we can grow, I would just urge caution. One, embracing the true reality that 25% of our people, 25% of leaders, 25% of those who walk in the door are going to struggle with some form of mental health issue. And it may be as simple as what we call the common colds of anxiety or depression. But our suicide conversation started with depression. And so there are many, many people who are struggling. This is, I believe, the most relevant topic. It is the most evangelical thing to do. And so if we want to be effective in ministering to people, we've got to be effective in talking about mental health issues. I think what we have done in many years past, and sometimes we still fall into this trap, is it's not our intention to shame someone, but that sometimes is the message that is received. That there's something that you're doing that is not good enough. There is some sin in your life, and that's why you're struggling with this. Or your faith is not strong enough. I've sat across from some of the godliest people I've ever met who were wrestling with a mental health condition they didn't ask for and didn't earn. And we see evidence of that in scriptures. As we talked about, David became deeply depressed. Elijah was despondent and asked God to take his life. And so I think we've got to be very, very careful to not be judgmental, not to further shame or isolate someone than what they might already be. And let's keep having the conversations. I think as a church, our community is having these conversations. So we need to keep having these conversations too, because we offer a hope that our community doesn't always have to offer.
One good thing that you said, and it's been a hard lesson for me to learn in a lot of ways as a pastor, as a husband, as a father, as all kind of things, that oftentimes what I'm trying to communicate is not exactly what's being received there. And when I was young and ignorant and arrogant, I would think, I'm saying it with a good heart. They'll just have to deal with it. I think at many times at the church, we really mean to help people, but sometimes we do put shame on them by saying your performance hasn't been good enough. If you would just be a better Christian, you wouldn't struggle with this. I think that's very powerful. What about, Donna, a family who has experienced that tragedy? There are some here at Upward, I know, and certainly many that are listening to us in the community and many different places who've experienced the tragedy of this. Do you have a word? I know this is just so good. You're here, and I want to get everything we can to these people. What would you say to them?
I would say you're not alone, because there are families all over the globe who are experiencing this deep, deep pain. You know, I was in sessions just before I came out here. I've been having this conversation with families this morning. You are not alone. And I would also say false guilt will be something that is used to keep you stuck. And when I say that point of pain, that point in which you lost a loved one, struggling with the lie that you somehow caused it will keep you stuck and will prevent you from moving through your suffering. And while I recognize life will never be the same again, there can be resilience, and there's some things we don't bounce back from, but we can bounce forward. I also recognize that many families, Andy, have been shamed by other people. They have been shunned. They've been scrutinized. They've been questioned. They've received hard questions, or they've had some people who just didn't know how to handle the situation or how to communicate it. So people have disappeared from your life, and I'm sorry that has happened, but I also want to say you're not alone. There is a group across our country called Survivors of Suicide. I'm going to encourage you, if you're listening to this, to find one of those to connect with online or locally somewhere. That will be a safe place to connect with others who really understand that very deep, complex grief. But the question a loved one will always ask is, what did I miss? What signs did I miss? You'll find yourself rehearsing conversation after conversation after conversation, trying to find nuggets that you missed. But the reality is, there's never a point in time in which you would have instigated this onto their life. That was a choice that they made, like many other choices. It's just a destructive choice that we're all vulnerable to.
Powerful words. Well, Donna, I thank you so much for your time today. I think this has been a real blessing for people. I know it's helped me. Our conversation today has really helped me to be more effective, I believe, in ministering to people and helping people there. It's really opened my eyes to a lot, and I believe it's touched a lot of people. I want to challenge you today. We're going to have those resources available, the National Suicide Hotline, the survivors, families, what was it again?
Survivors of Suicide, we call it SOS.
Yeah, we will have a link to a website there that you can find some help. Donna has also provided several videos to us on different mental health issues, and we will put some links to those as well so that you can get that. I want to just close this today by what Donna said earlier. Do this now. If you're thinking about suicide and this has touched something in your heart, your mind is clear, we're talking now, you're reasoning about this, take a step right now. Don't go to bed tonight before you've reached out to somebody, and I promise you, you'll find somebody that cares, and you'll find somebody that can help you.
So if you're struggling right now, just another reminder, you have plenty of options. I want you to reach out to the National Suicide Hotline. They are there waiting for you, and they're going to be there to help walk you through this. If you're brave enough to reach out to someone that you know, I would encourage you to do that right now. Reach out to that friend, a family member, someone that you trust. Reach out to your pastor. If you are a member of this church, I'm going to encourage you to make a phone call to the church and let one of these pastors know where you are. I can promise you it will be safe to do that, and they will be honored to walk with you through this journey. Don't do it alone, because you're not alone.
Thank you so much, Donna. I can't tell you how much this has meant to me, and I know it's touched a lot of people.
Thank you.